Welcome to the Mini Break, your day podcast for the biggest storylines, results, and controversies from the tennis world. Today is Wednesday, July 17th. We are back live on our Cracked Racquets YouTube channel for tonight's show. It is good to be back. Of course, the reason we want to do more of these podcasts live on YouTube is so that we can interact with all of you fans tuning in. Appreciate all of you joining us tonight. Obviously, if you have thoughts, if you have questions on anything we are talking about, fire those thoughts in the chat to those of you who are listening to this episode via podcast form the next day. Make sure you join us when we are live on YouTube next time. We plan on doing much more of these moving forward in the future. And on tonight's show, we're going to have some fun. Obviously, there are 6 tour level events going on this week on the pro tennis calendar. I have already recapped all of Wednesday's action in an episode now available on the Mini Break podcast feed. So if you are looking for that sort of content, that episode is the place for you. Given where we are currently at the calendar, though, now feels like the perfect time for both some reflection and some projection for moving forward as well. The year's third major, Wimbledon, now officially in the books. We got 1/3 of the tennis calendar left in front of us. Still plenty of big events on the horizon. We still have the Olympics. We still have Canada, Cincinnati, the US Open, and everything that happens afterwards as well. But we want to know, who might the players be that top over the course of the next 6 months? Who are the players that are going to help shape the narrative we see unfold, not just this season, but over the next 3 to 5 years, over the next decade as well? That topic, as it relates to the WTA Tour, is going to be our focus today. And you all know, when we break down a topic like that, there is nothing I enjoy more than coming up with a list, offering a ranking for all of you listeners to criticize on tonight's show. I've got my WTA 23 and under tier rankings for us to discuss. Who are the players that are going to factor into the next decade? That, of course, is our conversation for tonight's show. And then we'll talk about those WTA players with the most upwards mobility in the conversation moving forward. Joining me tonight to help break it all down is the man who has joined me so frequently here live on our Cracked Racquets YouTube channel. He is, of course, essentially a co-host of the Mini Break podcast feed at this point, returning champion du jour, lead editor for allthingstennis.com. It is our dear friend David Kane joining us once again. DK, welcome back to the podcast. How are you feeling as we get ready to talk 23 and under tiers?
The 3 of us are all here. You, me, and my ring light. It finally popped on in the middle of your lengthy intro. And I have to say, I jumped the gun a couple times because I thought you were about to introduce me, but you were just further introducing the topics. And I was like, and ready, who can join me but the list that I created? And I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll have to wait. I'm second fiddle. I know where I stand on this podcast.
Yeah, look, you're on this podcast, I would say, almost once a week, which I am thoroughly grateful for, as are our listeners. But my lists are with me each and every day. So yeah, they're number one in the power rankings in the intro order. But of course, you are number one in our hearts, DK, and we are happy to have you back. Before I let you go, did you have any lingering Wimbledon thoughts? Any things you need to plug from tennis.com before we get started with tonight's exercise? Obviously, the fortnight is not that far removed. How are you feeling now that we're 2-3 days out?
Oh, exhausted. I mean, I've been in the middle of my own little post-Wimbledon break. So I feel like I'm just plugging back in to tennis for at least a couple of days before I take a longer sabbatical pre-Olympics and pre-Canada since the US Open. They're really this is my swing. This is the DK tennis swing that I'm really looking forward to covering. But yeah, I mean, I think it was a pretty great finale to the Wimbledon fortnight. We got an intense women's final. We got a pretty electric men's final that, raised all sorts of questions, answered some for others, and, kind of set the stage for this, what should be a very exciting fourth quarter of 2024, all of which we covered on tennis.com and or Baseline.
When I think of you as a Budapest or Stade sort of guy. So yeah, this is your sort of week. I like that you call 2 days
Palermo
off.
If you're nasty.
Yeah, I like if you call 2 days off a vacation from tennis. As we both know, that's about all the time you get, given how the calendar moves. But yeah, you and the team killed it, as you always do. Again, everyone needs to be reading tennis.com for updates on all aspects of everything happening in the tennis world. Here tonight, We're going to take a step back, though. And again, I always enjoy when you assess a list I offered you. I texted you beforehand. Do you want me to send you the list so you can get your criticisms ready, or should we do it live? As a wise man once said, you said, let's do it live here tonight. So that
That's a reference.
is
It's a good
going
one.
to be our thank you. I appreciate it, particularly given that guest appearance on the Daily Show this week. It feels pertinent to the culture. But all that is to say, we got a list for you to break down here tonight. I've got my 23 and under tiers. And let's just start quickly, very quickly, with the obvious question. Why 23? Why was that the magic number I wanted to talk to in trying to project who the most promising prospects are moving forward on the WTA Tour? DK, I think this is a pretty obvious reason. Any conversation of the future, 3 to 5 years, decade length, whichever time frame you want to choose, even heck, what's the next month going to look like? It has to include Iga Swiatek. She's already won 4 majors. We can get into more of the numbers. I'm not going to do the full breakdown again because we did that, like a month ago, where I compared her to the Celises and Everett's and Navratilovas of the world. I think I forgot Everett at the time. Hand up, unforced error by me. But if you're
Let's
going
not
to
hype her too hard, because every time we do, she tends to have a really terrible result
Well,
shortly
but
thereafter. She's not playing this week, so I could, by all means, go ahead.
yeah, well, the point is, if you're going to project the future, I just think Iga Swiatek has to be in that
Yes.
conversation, right? And it's just like 23 is not old. It's not. And so I don't mind starting my
32
list
isn't old.
Yeah, exactly. I don't, well, I mean, yeah, no comment. I just don't mind starting my list at 23 because I think this conversation for any framework we're going to include has to have Iga in it, and honestly has to have her as a barometer to how you compare the rest of the field moving forward. Is that fair?
Only if we're going to call the podcast 23 and you and me. That feels like a
That's
pretty
good.
appropriate way
This
to
is
sum
why
that
we
one up.
keep you around. That's a lead editor comment there. That's a perfect episode title. Westoff, if you're listening, write that down. Make sure we leave that in, and there we go. But all right, then, let's get into the list. And I've got plenty of honorable mention. We'll get to them at the end. I broke things
I'm
down
sure it's
into,
more honorable mention than list. I'm
exactly.
going to make a prediction right ahead.
Here's why. Because honorable mention versus how you qualify for the tiers, it explains the category and the criteria. I ultimately have 3 tiers because we have the presence of Iga. I've got a 4th on the women's side, but 3 tiers I typically go with. Tier number 1, in an exercise like this, I am 100% certain this player will win a slam in the next decade. That's the degree of certainty I have to have about you to throw you in tier number 1. And again, obviously, in the case of Coco Gauff, she has already won a major for the purpose of this exercise. I considered her as needs to win that second major. And again, forget everything that happened in New York last year. Tier 2 should make 3 to 5 tour finals over the next decade. What does that mean? I see you as a top 8 player. That's the framework I've tried to incorporate over the course of this year because top 8 should matter. If we're going to have a tour finals and say that event is the event of the best of any season, top 8 is the aspiration. Don't matter if you're 9 or 10. You got to be top 8 to get into that event. If I think you can make not just 1 tour finals, but I think that's where you should be competing for the course of your career. Think about Andrei Rublev over the course of this past half decade. Like that to me is a tier 2 player, someone who's just going to be in the mix everywhere, even if that's not someone you think is going to end up with racking up multiple titles. Tier 3 for me is, again, the differentiation between honorable mention and tier 3. You got to have legitimate top 8 potential. That doesn't mean I think you're going to be a top 8 player consistently throughout the course of your career. In fact, I think you're probably going to live more in that 12 to 25 range. But in the right season, with the right conditions, you could Kasatkina it. You could Kudermatova it. You could maybe even better than that and Paulini it and finish in the top 8 and be a significant part of a conversation over the course of the next decade. That is my criteria for my tiers. DK, any questions, any follow-ups before I get into my list?
Just that I pulled up the list of players who are under the age of 24, therefore 23 and under on the WTA Live rankings. And I have to say, I am horrified. I don't even know where we're going with this. I can't wait to see. I'm glad we're not robbing all my fan of my live reaction because I feel like we're gonna get some takes in the next 15 to 20 minutes.
Well, good. Then let's start those takes right away and let's get to it. My tiers here for the 23 and under talent. It is essentially a PowerPoint presentation. And thank you, as always, to our producer, Daniel Westoff, who makes these sorts of graphics possible and makes it worthwhile to tune into our YouTube channel, even though he has an update that David Kane Kane graphic, but again,
Yeah.
that's another unforced error by me. Let's start with those tier 3 players then. And again, these are all players who I think, maybe not right now, but in the course of the next decade, so till July 17th, 2033, I think there's top 8 potential there. I think it's a player that can factor into a significant conversation, can factor into some slam runs over the course of the next 10 years. My list of tier 3 players, I've got 8 of them for you here. Starts out with Emma Navarro. Obviously, she has made herself a name over the course of this season. And yes, this feels like we're still in the midst of her first full year of tour level play. Given that's the case, for her to be at 15th in the live rankings, for her to be sitting right now at 11th in the points race, this is year one of a full-time tour schedule. You feel like there's still more growth to be had given the consistency across surfaces. Anyways, I'll try not to do this for every player, otherwise we'll be here forever. I have Diana Schneider on this list. Quietly, Schneider, I've over the past month called her the most underrated 21 and under talent we have. I don't think that can be the case any longer now that she's established herself as a top 30 player, up to a new career high 28 this week in the live rankings. I think Emma Raducanu still has to be on this list. Yeah, it feels like she's been a part of our lives for a half decade now. She's still just 21 years old, 2021 U.S. Open champion. She played a really good month of grass court tennis, and maybe we can get into her more. I have Leylah Fernandez on this list, the other half of that 2021 U.S. Open final. Fernandez, 21 years old still, back up to 23 in the live rankings, sneaky higher than you would have expected. Again, we can talk about for all these players why they're in tier 3 and not higher. If you'd like, we'll get into that in a second. The talent of Amanda Anisimova, will she ever be healthy, is an open question. But, you know, again, keep in mind, Amanda Anisimova right now, still just 22 years old, 174 in the live rankings, but she won matches at a major earlier this year. Like, we all know what she can be. We talk about Potapova all the time. I have her on this list for obvious reasons. I feel like if I were to say which player could someday pull a Jasmine Paolini type year out of her hat, Potapova would probably be the number one nominee for me right now of those players of like, yeah, like kind of lived in that 30 to 50 range and then boom, it all clicked in one year. Then 2 big hitters I'm just not ready to give up on, both because they're still particularly young. Clara Tauson, 21 years old. Yeah, there have been some struggles on the road back after all these injuries and just not finding her form, but has worked her way up through ITF events and otherwise back up to number 62 in the live rankings. And then the power of 20-year-old Ashlyn Kruger, 86 in the live rankings. Has she had a breakthrough signature result? I know she had that run at the end of last year in Asia, but still waiting for it at a big event. The power is captivating. The size is captivating. Anyways, those are my 8 tier 3 players. And David Kane, we're not going to break down all of them, I promise. But I just want to ask you, of those tier 3, let's start with the glass half full case. Is there someone in this player who you think, in this category, who you think this is a tier too low for them? And if so, who?
I apologize because I feel like you explained the tiers in great detail, but just to clarify, these are players that you think in the next decade will pull together at least one season worthy of contending for the WTA finals?
That's exactly right. So tier 1, you're winning a major. Tier 2, you are going to be in the top 8 conversation for the majority of your prime. Tier 3 is, hey, that's not you, but you might have a season, maybe even 2, where top 8, that sort of talent, that sort of result, that sort of run is in you. And in that mind, yes, these are all tier 3 players that I think they have at least one top 8 season in them over the next decade.
Huh. Yeah, it's interesting for some of them because I've just, from what we have seen of them, to picture that level of consistency from January to November, Anastasia Potapova and like a few other players on this list. I'm like, I feel like in for some of these players, we haven't seen enough. And some of these players, it's almost like we've seen too much. Leylah Fernandez and Emma Raducanu, in the sense of like, you know, we kind of know what to expect from them. I feel like when I look at a Raducanu and even a Fernandez, I almost feel like there should be a tier for like your Ostapenko-like player, like a player who I don't necessarily, I mean, I guess in fairness to you, Ostapenko is effectively competing for the top 8 this year. So that is, even though I don't think of her as having had a really particularly consistent year, she is competing for the top 8. So that's sort of where I guess
tier 3 player description. That's a good comp. Like that feels about right in that range. maybe a Madison Keys range where it's just kind of like, hey, on the right weeks, you know this player's going to be super competitive, but they're not in the hunt for all 11 months of the season, and that's what
Yeah.
holds them back. Like, all these players have shades of that. I guess then, as opposed to asking, do you think any of these players should be higher, since it feels like the answer to that question is no, who in my tier 3 rankings, and the list again for the podcast listeners who don't have the graphic in front of them: Navarro, Schneider, Raducanu, Fernandez, Anisimova, Potapova, Tauson, Kruger. Of those 8 names, which name appeals to you
Well,
most and why?
yeah, like I said, I feel like I feel different things about different players on this list. When I
Sure.
look at like Clara Tauson, Ashlyn Kruger, when I look at even maybe an Amanda Nisimova and a Diana Schneider, those are players who I feel like either we don't know enough about in the terms of Schneider, but I'm optimistic for what I see. And the same thing for Kruger. And then I look at Tauson and Nisimova, and I feel like those are players who have largely been hindered by injury and have display a level of ball striking and talent that I feel like, okay, you're capable of being a tier higher.
Mm.
And then I look at someone like Emma Navarro, who we have not spoken about since she got stomped by Jasmine Paolini in the Wimbledon quarterfinals. Feeling a little bit vindicated there because I was really trying to pump the brakes on the train there. And I do feel like, it feels very early to be prognosticating out 10 years for Emma Navarro, because I would still want to see a full year. The way that she is conducted this year makes me want to see how she can back it up for a second year, because we've seen the likes of even Leila Fernandez, really struggle to back up that, lightning, that really exciting first year and a half, and then maybe not be able to back that up when you don't have that level of power behind you. It's really hard to maintain that level of consistency, especially when you're not the biggest, the tallest, the strongest. And then an Anastasia Potapova, who I feel like has, still has quite a bit of a ceiling in front of her that like we have not seen her necessarily prove capable of breaking. Like we've seen Clara Tauson get a big result. We've seen Amanda Nisimova get a big result. Alila Fernandez or Raducanu. So I don't know who's the most exciting to me on this list. I still kind of feel like it's Anisimova, just in terms of her ball striking. And I feel like that even as she figures things out, she could be that. She to me is probably the best comp of like that Madison Keys, Yelena Ostapenko type player who, because she is so naturally talented, that if she can get fit and motivated and healthy and consistent, she really could race up the rankings fairly quickly. She's not someone who necessarily needs to reinvent her game or, play a different kind of tennis. She just needs to play her game as well as she has ever played it. And that would be enough. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like some players would really have to really be different, turn into different players, or really change their game or their style in the next 2 to 3 years to really, make good on this prediction.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I just want to acknowledge the people in the chat who want to point out that I'm not acknowledging them yet. I apologize for that. I was trying to get the show going first.
I acknowledge my fan right off the start.
We have someone tuning in from the Netherlands tonight. How cool is that? Shout out to you tuning in from the Netherlands. They think calling Ostapenko the definition of a tier 3 player is disrespectful. Make the case for why she belongs in tier number 2 when top 8 Frisky has felt like the Ostapenko story. We know on the right week she is, on the wrong week sometimes she's not. And so, yeah, like I like that description for tier 3. To your points, it's interesting. The biggest result of any player on this tier 3 list obviously belongs to Emma Raducanu. And you talk about like who on this list have we seen the best tennis from, period. It's definitely Raducanu and her run to that 2021 US Open and how exceptional she was. Anisimova's run to the French Open semis is up there though on the list. Now I would point out on the Emma Navarro case, she's 5th in tour level wins so far this season. She trails like Collins, Swiatek, Rybakina, and I'm blanking on who the other one is, but that's it. She's 5-9 against top 20 opponents, but top 5 in quarterfinals overall on the year as well. Like, Emma's had a really good year, and she's been pretty good at the big events as well. It's not just 250 hunting for her, right? Yeah, the Wimbledon quarterfinal didn't go well, but she made quarterfinals Wimbledon. She made round of 16 Roland Garros. Third round Australian Open sounds disappointing in retrospect, but like, for someone who has played fewer than 10 major main draws in her career, it's a really good year number 1 for Emma Navarro, who's just kind of been good all season long.
Look, we've seen
She's good
this.
at
We've seen the story play out one of two ways. We've seen like a
yeah.
Simona Halep have like a really consistent year and then translate it to the big stage, and then the following year, make the Grand Slam final. So there are two ways that this path can diverge for Emma Navarro,
Yeah.
but I do feel like because she was so unknown that there does tend to be this realignment period where the field figures you out. And so
Yeah.
how she responds then, and I will also say that there are, between you and
But
other people who have said that she does have the tennis aptitude to make those adjustments. So
can I yeah,
that is possible.
can I ask, because let's have that tennis conversation. What's the case against Navarro? Like, what is the thing that opponents adjust to and go after? Because Emma Navarro's pretty good at everything. I don't know if she's exceptional at anything, to your point. Like, the second serve leaves some things to be desired. Everyone's second serve leaves things to be desired. She can amp up the forehand. That is a legitimate weapon. She can change the backhand and redirect it line. She can move forward comfortably, volley well. She's top 10 in break percentage so far this year. That's a skill that's going to last. She has gotten so much quicker since her college days. And I don't think anyone looks at Emma Navarro and thinks movement's an issue for her moving forward. Can't she just be a better Kasatkina? And isn't that player a top 12 player for the next 5 years?
I just think, I don't know, maybe this is like an anti-American, anti-college bias. You just feel like these players who didn't
Well, I
work their
like it
way.
because I'm the other way. So we need that perspective.
Because I feel like when you're a Kasakina or an Ostapenko, you have that certain junior pedigree. You've won your
But
junior
so did
slam.
Emma. Emma won a junior slam in doubles, but like she was a junior
Oh,
double
girl.
slam champion. Yeah.
Oh, God. You had me there for a second. I was like, wait a
Yeah.
minute. What juniors are you going to be like? She won the
Yeah.
2019 Junior
No,
US Open. Don't you
doubles,
remember?
doubles, but still.
So did
Like I'm
Tamaya
saying,
Babos, honey. That doesn't really mean
what I'm
anything.
trying to say is though, like she was a top 20 junior. Like she was
Look,
in those circles.
okay. I mean, sure. But I just think the thing is right now, she is playing so free. She
Yeah.
is still relatively new. And
Yeah.
you hear these players really, they depend on the tape and to be able to have that like level of knowledge and familiarity with the player. And to your point, she's evidently a very different player than she was as a junior anyway. She's vastly improved. So there is this realignment period that happens where you learn how to beat these players. And when she'll have a lot of points to defend next year, she will not have the same amount of freedom. She'll have more pressure, more expectation, players having a better understanding of how to beat her. That creates the sophomore slump. That just happens. It happened for Kasakina. So I mean, it's how she figures it out. And yes, I do think she has a certain level of aptitude to counter program and come up with different things, but I do think she will be limited by the fact that she doesn't have a major weapon and the fact that she's not the most powerful player. I think the most players that I'm most optimistic about are the players who can hit their way into consistent streaks, those Towsons, Krugers, especially if we're talking about a tier 3, or rather a player who can cobble together a top 8 season vis-a-vis like 5 to 6 really great results.
Yeah, fair enough. Someone called us, I'm the good cop, you're the bad cop. I think that's a very fair assessment as well.
I'm the mean judge.
Yeah, and that's why I keep
I'm the Russian judge.
Keep me honest. Look, I think Navarro's the surest thing of this group. I actually think she's put together the best 6-month stretch of anyone on this list, which again, Navarro, Schneider, Raducanu, Fernandez, Anisimova, Potapova, Tauson, Kruger.
Well, yes, but that was not the test. The test was 10 years from now.
But that matters. I'm saying of all these players we've seen so far, we know for 6 months, Emma Navarro can consistently be a top 15 player. Like she's proven that. And that at least
haven't we seen that from Anisimova?
No, but to me, that's gateway entry to tier number 3. Again, I think Anisimova, Raducanu, their highs are the highest. Fernandez to me is like a Navarro light. Like, yeah, she had her U.S. Open run. It's a similar conversation. Potapova, we're going to talk about more later. Tauson, Kruger, we'll talk about a lot over the next decade, so we can skip them here. The one last player I want to ask you about before we move out of tier 3. It's been a fast rise for her since leaving NC State since May, but Diana Schneider's now top 30 in the world. And I'm just curious if you have a take on the lefty, who, by the way, is now up to 19th in overall ELO rating. Schneider is now up to 12th in 2024 specific ELO rating. You look for her overall in the season, 32-14 on the year, wins the title in Bad Homburg. Bunch of 125K success as well. A couple of quarterfinals under her resume as well. Wins the title in Hua Hin earlier this season also. Lefty's got real weapons, and you just see her explode through the ball. It's fun. Upwards mobility, is it in there for you? Like, do you think she could be a top 8 player consistently?
Top 8. I mean, physically, again, she's not the biggest.
She's pretty freaking strong though. And
She
I
is
mean,
strong. Yeah,
yeah,
there's a weight of shot that I really
yeah,
respond to.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And her ability to get outside the ball. Like it's
Yeah.
not just in your face power, it's cross court power, it's redirected power. She can do things that you're right, she's not the tallest, but power for is not the issue for her.
Am I blanking on any other like big hitting lefties? I feel like
Kvitova?
stereotypically, well, yeah, of course,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
But like active players.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, because I feel like to be a big hitting or a heavy hitting lefty is a tremendous asset. Because I feel like we see a lot of like spin lefties or like crafty lefties. I mean, even like the difference between Kristina Pliskova and Karolina Pliskova. Like Kristina was never quite had the heaviness that Karolina was able to generate off of her racket. Um, I'm still looking for like a signature win, a signature result. I do like the fact that she's building on the 250 level. I feel like that to me is different than someone who built up their resume on the 125Ks on the pro circuit. Like, 'cause I feel like this is the 250s are they're pretty big tournaments, and as big as they get, relatively speaking. And I feel like she's moving kind of at a decent pace. I would like her to be maybe a little bit farther ahead of the game than she was, based on how close she was to beating Sakari, for example, in Australia last year. Like I was thinking things would happen maybe a little bit faster for her.
Yeah.
Maybe probably the least explosive, but perhaps maybe someone who can, string together a pretty consistent career. But that to me also doesn't necessarily lend itself to top 8. Maybe she's like a top 20, top 12, top 15 player.
Fair. Again, that's why it's tier 3. Again, she's not the quickest, and that hasn't mattered because she has just been dictating to every opponent that she faces. She's not a bad mover. Like I'm telling you, I like the first step. I love how well she anticipates. She's so strong. If she gets her hands on the ball, something good is happening with that shot. And again, 46 and 32 overall tour level for her career, 13 and 14 against top 50, 4 and 6 against the top 20. It's just a different ball than you're used to facing. You're absolutely right. And the thing I'll keep pointing out, she just turned 20. Like she is sneaky young in this conversation. A decade from now, she's still 30. And she is explosive enough and hits a big enough ball. It reminds me of like a younger Tsitsipas, where I wasn't sure about his side to side movement either. And then he grew into his body and he just became more comfortable as a professional athlete, as they all do over the years. And I am betting on Schneider to continue to just improve all of the things. I know how she is as a competitor. I've heard the stories, from her college time and how determined she is to be the best she can be. Like, I just think it reminds me almost of Taylor Fritz, where it's like how well she strikes the ball. The rest shouldn't matter. And she should be a top 15 player, to your point. Now, again, I'm not ready to go full-time top 8. I think there's a top 8 year in there. She beats Navarro in Bad Homburg before losing in a really fun 3-set third round match at Wimbledon. Again, I feel comfortable with these 3 names on the list. My last question, I guess, would be: you can boot one name off. Who are you booting? Is it Kruger?
To
Just
like
because we
demote
haven't seen enough?
them, or
Yeah,
to bring
you
them
could
up.
demote one name from this
I can
list.
demote. I mean, I've been so tough on her. I mean, I would be between Fernandez and maybe Kruger.
Right.
Like, but I'm assuming she's not on tier 1 or tier 2, but I would have liked to have seen Olga Danilovich on this list, because I feel like if Schneider is your lefty, Danilovich is mine. I feel like that really differentiates the two of us, because I do feel like she's someone who, if one of these days, it feels like, even though I did not love the fact that she made the third round of Roland Garros last year and was in qualies again, but then she made the third round again. I was like,
Yeah.
Olga, we
Fair
gotta
enough.
stop meeting like this.
I got a 3-name tier 2 for all of you. And again, tier 2 for me, players who I think should make 3 to 5 tour finals over the course of the next decade. My 3 names: Jung Chinwen, Linda Noskova, and Marta Kostyuk, who have all earned tier 2 status just over tier number 3 now. I think the case for Chinwen of why she gets a status boost, it's not just that she made an Australian Open final. Obviously, from Palermo last year to the start of through the Australian Open this year, she was very clearly one of the 8 best players in the world. Again, reigning Palermo champion. That's kind of where things got going. It starts with her first serve. What that is an obvious weapon. The totality of the pace she brings, the explosiveness, the movement, the size, all the different things. Yeah, you can get frustrated with the forehand technique. Certainly Chinwen can get streaky, and there hasn't been a lot to celebrate. Just 2 quarterfinals for Chinwen since making that Australian Open final. But the 6 months I saw from Palermo through the Australian Open, the fact that Qin Wen still, by the way, sitting right now with that result at 10th in the points race, just 21 years old. I think she's the first name I turn to when I think of tier number 2. I think she would be first of these 3 names as well. Now, the forehand technique is why I've knocked her from tier 1 status. I just too streaky. As good as those 6 months were, just it's been a really uninspiring stretch since Australia when the runway was just so clearly there for her to consolidate a top 8 position and just be that player moving forward. She didn't do it. Now she's still just 21, but that's why I knock her from tier 1 to tier 2, because we kind of have seen enough tennis now from Qin Wen, who for her career, I have the numbers in front of me just because I was, of course, curious, and I knew DK, you would want to know these numbers more than anything. 15 and 24 against top 20 opponents, 6 and 13 against top 10 opponents for her career. Again, you look for her at the tour level overall. Qin Wen, 94 and 57 overall. She's made it to 12 different quarterfinals so far. Like, those numbers feel a little low. Those numbers feel like they should be higher for a player who we know what the upside might look like. Again, her 3-set loss to Iga at the 2022 French Open is just like one of those losses you remember if you saw that match. Fair to knock her to tier 2?
I don't know. I got to be honest. I'm kind of distracted by the fact that there is a certain player who's not on tier 2 or tier 3, which means she's on tier 1, and I'm kind of excited about it. It's kind of a sexy pick.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it's the problem with it. Really is the fundamental issue with Zheng Qinwen, who is just such a star, like just like so like charismatic and so easy to talk to, and has all of the things that you want from a champion, and just has these limitations, with the first serve and with the forehand. And that's, the fact that she's made a slam final with those limitations is sort of shocking, but I guess Coco Gauff went one better and won a slam with her limitations. So, it is about, in some instances, mitigating the weaknesses enough so that you can be consistent and confident and not feel mentally brought down by them. But it is rough when you see Qin Wen serve at 35% or lower, and you think, how is this, how does this work, against an Aryna Sabalenka, who has now beaten her twice, in the last 2 hardcourt slams, and it really wasn't close.
Just a statistic to your point, just to lock in your argument. First serve percentage for Qin Wen these last 4 years at tour level. Started things out 44.4% in the 4 matches she played in 2021. Not great. Big improvement the next year. She was up to 51.8%. You know what she was in 2023? 51.8%. You know what she's been so far here in 2024? 51.8% first serve percentage. Now, through all of that, DK, she's still holding serve 74.6%. That's a top 10 number amongst top 50 players. But that first serve percentage is horrid. And the argument both for and against her starts there, because it's really bad right now. But keep in mind that she's 21 years old, and you figure worst case scenario, that number gets to 55%, right?
I don't know, because it does seem like a technical problem, and that technical problem doesn't seem like it's solved. And honestly, that 51 number feels generous, and maybe she probably does serve a bit better, and maybe 50 more often than not, and and it's just in these big matches where she shows up and serves under 50%, or matches that she loses and serves under 50%, because it really does it for someone who plays the game that she plays. She needs first strike tennis, and right now she cannot rely on a first strike.
Yeah. The Nadir this year, she made just 40.5% of her first serves in her quarterfinal Rome loss to Coco Gauff. That's tough. That's a tough serving performance. That's not going to work. You're absolutely right. Now, here's the argument for her. Have you seen how explosive she is? Like, it's almost a Sabalenka-like bet where it's just, I think she can figure this out. There's too much talent. There's too much shoulder talent there.
Almost Sabalenka.
To not clean this up. Like, I'm not that concerned with the forehand because her racket speed is so immense. I agree. It has been a disappointing post-Australian Open stretch for a player who had felt like things were right there for her to make this signature run. But she is still a premier 23 and under talent, which, again, is the group of players we're talking about here tonight. I think she has to be in tier number 2. And again, She's already made a slam final to this point of her career. You look for her overall 25-11 at the majors. That includes quarterfinals US Open last year, fourth round Roland Garros 2022. The only place she hasn't had a big run is Wimbledon, though she did make a third round there in 2022 before a 6-5 loss to eventual champion Elena Rybakina. She's the first name on tier 2. Who surprises you more to be in that tier 2 category, Linda Noskova or Marta Kostyuk? My other two picks, and why?
Probably Kostyuk. I feel
Okay.
like we've spoken enough about Linda Noskova. I mean, the fact that she's not even tier 1 feels like a grave admission, perhaps that we've oversold her. But
Okay.
I mean, yeah,
Kostyuk
I
was
mean,
the toughest pick because there's a big body of work, and it really comes down to what do you want to see when you see her.
it's there's something about, I don't know. It's just Kostyuk is such a tricky one because again, she does
Okay.
not have the power, and she's someone who doesn't necessarily inspire confidence that this is going to happen long. Like she's riding a wave right now, but you don't know at what point this might crest. She's someone who is very emotional, someone who is, obviously been through a lot. She's emotional for a reason. I'm not diminishing that, but I just feel like there's something about the run so far that feels in some ways above her, because I don't know. I don't know if I don't know what the difference is from last year to this year. Why she seems like she's in a more stable coaching situation, but I don't know. There's something about looking at her compared to even Anisimova, who was more likely to win a big title. Like it still feels like an Anisimova, even though Kostyuk has played more consistent tennis this year than perhaps Anisimova ever has. So yeah. I have to make that caveat, but there's something about Kostyuk on this list compared to a Noskova Jung Qinwen, who makes sense to me. Someone who can hit their way to these big titles. I don't know if Kostyuk has that same ceiling. Yes, she's very talented. Yes, she's one of the smartest players on tour, and someone who can hit every shot in tennis, like some people on my shirt, but does not maybe not have that kill shot, that certain last bit. There's still something missing. That's all.
I think Kostyuk is the slightly springier version of Navarro, where it's good everywhere, can do a little bit of everything.
You love an all-around player.
No, I mean, again, Kostyuk makes, what was it, semis of Australia this year? Quarters, whatever it was. Quarters. Yeah,
quarters
that ghastly match with Goff. Yeah. But made 2 500 finals, right? In Stuttgart, in San Diego this year. Was pretty good at Indian Wells as well, making the semifinals there. Second round exit, Roland Garros to Vekic. Third round Wimbledon exit to Keys. Not the greatest, but not horrible either. Look, she's 2 wins away from a career high in single season victories, and we're on July 17th with so much tennis still ahead. Obviously, things have clicked for her this year. The big thing, the break percentage, over 38% for the first time in her career, up 3% from last year. Top 25 for the first time in that category. She's more consistent on the forehand return, which was a problem certainly for her early in her career, given that big backswing. I've said it before, they're just shades of Bianca Andreescu, shades of just this all-around supreme athlete who on the right day can do everything and can match up with anyone, not just the power tennis players. But, again, I know Kostyuk lost her matchup earlier this season to Egad Indian Wells 2-1, and that one didn't look particularly kind. But, in theory, I could see Kostyuk at least keeping pace with Swiatek from a physical standpoint in a way a lot of other players on this list I don't think would be able to do. And I think those sorts of things matter. Again, Kostyuk, as much and as long as she has been a part of our life, she's still just 22 years old, currently sitting at 19 in the live rankings. Clearly had taken her biggest step forward here this year. If I'm projecting a decade out, tier 3 might have been more appropriate for Kostyuk as the top name. But I do think there's top 8 tennis there, and I think she can do it multiple times. I've seen that through the start of this year, where she's 14th in the points race.
I should clarify. I think I was because it feels like I haven't seen much of Kostyuk in the last couple months, and I realized the reason why is because she's really not won that many matches since she made the Stuttgart final and lost opening round Madrid, Rome, second round to Vekic and Roland Garros, lost both of her grass court warm-ups, made the third round at Wimbledon, lost to Keys, played a really good match against Daria Seville, a match that Seville probably should have finished. in fairness to Seville. But I think that's where I would have expected her to really break through and make a lot of results on the clay. And the fact that it was such a lackluster clay season, now pretty lackluster grass season, sometimes that does happen with these players in their development. They grow up on clay, they play really good clay tennis, they adjust their game for hard courts, and then all of a sudden the clay court game abandons them. So I would love to see another clay season from her, because I do feel like that is where she will have her best opportunity. That's my sense, that she would play her best on clay. And maybe I'm sure there's a quote somewhere that's gonna be like, "You idiot, she doesn't even like clay. That's her least favorite surface." But like, I just feel like based on her the cerebral way in which she plays tennis, the lack of offensive firepower, those two things are more conducive to clay than perhaps the faster surfaces.
Yeah, the argument against also, and a lot of this was early struggles. Kostyuk's played a lot of top 20, top 10 matches. She's 10-33 against the top 20 in her career, 7-18 against the top 10. It's been better this year, but
it
that's
took
a big
while
sample
to
size.
get a signature win. Yeah.
And that's an issue. And, again, we talked about the case against her, the case against Chin Wen. Linda Noskova, 19 years old, career 62-37 at tour level events. She's 7-17 against top 20 opponents, 6-11 against the top 10. Obviously has a win over Iga at a major. Anytime you can do that before the age of 20, you have our attention. The firepower is very, very obvious, and already she's top 25 in hold percentage. Went from 66.7 in the 8 matches she played in 2022 to 70.9% last year, now up to 73.9% hold percentage this season. The argument against is she's a little stiff, like not the best mover in and out of the corners, and when she's on her front foot, it can be special. Obviously, when you can get her pushed back, things get a little bit trickier. I mean, I don't think the losses this year, I'm just going to read her last 10 losses, we'll say. Iga, Raducanu, Mira Andreeva, Chinwen, Begu, Jabeur, Tomova, and Drescu. Not the worst losses there for the 19-year-old, even if there hasn't really been a standout result for her since the Australian Open. Is tier 2 too high, or are you fine with it?
See, this is a reference that you won't get, but on America's Next Top Model, when Tyra would call the bottom two up to the carpet and there would only be one left, and she would tell them, each of you has what the other one needs. And that kind of reminds me of Noskova and Chinwen and Kostyuk. It's like, God, Chinwen could really use Noskova's technique, and Kostyuk could really use Noskova's firepower, and Noskova could really use Kostyuk and Jung's, charisma and star power, movement. Like they kind of all to combine the three of them, there'd be an unstoppable player.
That's a tier 1
storming
player.
the WTA. Exactly. But Noskova is Noskova this year's Towson? I hope not, because I feel like they're both such talented ball strikers. And again, someone who can consistently challenge the number 1 player in the world. It does need to figure out how to deal with 2 through 40, on a more consistent basis. But I think there's just so much upside to. She is probably the most exciting ball striker of this up and coming generation, and that makes it easy to make her a tier 2 pick, because if you're someone who's beating a world number 1 at a slam, then and has that sort of gravitas behind it, that does make you feel like this is legit.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Highest ranked teenager in the world. You just can't fake her firepower. And I know projecting men's and women's not the same, but I used to think Tsitsipas, Sinner were going to be too stiff. As fantastic as their firepower was, that was my concern. And sometimes you just grow out of it. Sometimes you develop that additional athleticism, that additional spring. And again, Noskova's not the greatest mover, but I think there's room for improvement there. And you just can't fake that ball striking. So yeah, that's my tier number 2. And I do think there's a difference between that group and tier number 3. But let's move on to tier number 1 now. These are the 2 players I think sure things to win slams over the next decade. 2 23 and under players in my tier 1 category. I have Coco Gauff and Mira Andreeva. The case for Gauff is very clear. Since the start of her run to the French Open final in 2022, she's 110-40 overall. That's a 73% win percentage. She's lost just 2 first-round matches during that stretch of time. Obviously, won a major as well during that stretch of time. 23-25 overall against top 20 opponents, but if you take out the Iga losses and wins, she's 16, against top 20 opponents. Again, same thing for the top 10. You take out the Iga losses, she's 13-10 against top 10 opponents during that time. as long as she's been a part of our lives, she's still just 20 years old. Like, and there have been little improvements every season for Coco Gauff. This season, it's the learn how to win ugly, as she's had to do at times at Indian Wells, at Roland Garros, at Wimbledon, even in putting together solid results, even if not signature, still solid results. Australia against Kostyuk. 20 years old, and she knows how to win in every fashion. Obviously, the forehand technique is an issue. Obviously, the biggest issue of all, she has an Achilles heel, and that Achilles heel is Iga Swiatek, who is just 3 years older than her and doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. Still, as we've seen, Iga is susceptible to early exits, and I just think that should that happen, Coco Gauff will be in a position at almost every major over the next 10 years to capitalize. And I just think she'll be able to get through at one of them.
I mean, I do have to say, I'm assuming Iga is in her own tier. Is that what is there a top? Is that
there is a hall
corner?
It's called
like
an all-time tier. Yeah.
Because I feel like I don't necessarily, I don't know if I want to be associated
spoil that
with
now.
this.
The all-time tier is Iga
Okay.
Swiatek. Yeah.
Okay, good.
She gets her own tier because that's the benchmark with which we all measure. Spoiler alert.
Take your screenshots now.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to be a part of any screenshot that you didn't even put Iga Swiatek on the top tier 1. How dare you not even mention her? She's made won a million slams already.
She didn't even get tier 1 status. She gets her own tier.
Awesome. That's even better.
Yeah.
by all means. But okay, yeah, I know that was the name that I was referring to earlier when I saw that Mira Andreeva wasn't in the tier 2 list. I inferred that meant she was going to be in the tier 1 list, and that is the bold pick of this episode.
Is
and
it though?
I mean, there was a decent argument for Zheng Qinwen. There is a decent argument, maybe less decent, for maybe Linda Noskova. I mean, tier 1, you're saying they will definitely win a slam in the next 10 years. And
I'm ready to go there with her after that French Open run, after just the entirety of the clay court season where she was pretty good week in, week out. She's now made second week or further at 3 of the 4 majors, and she just turned 17. Like, career 39-19 at the tour level. And by the way, she's 9-8 against top 20 opponents, 3-5 against the top 10. The athleticism is there. The technique is there. I don't think she has a signature weapon yet, but the backhand line is something for me to get interested about. The serve is obviously a table setter, even if it's not a signature weapon yet. Andreeva's pretty complete, and it's like she's only going to get more physically impressive as she continues to just develop and grow into her body, and become 22 years old. I think the next decade's really promising. And if this is the foundation, I think Slam is in the horizon.
I mean, I have to say, I'm a little annoyed because I wrote a beautiful story about Mira Andreeva on the eve of Wimbledon, only for her to lose in the first round. I really thought that was the stars were going to align there. She's 17, and it's 20 years after Maria won Wimbledon at 17. Here she comes, and it didn't work out. But yeah, what I like about Andreeva, first and foremost, is that there are no technical hitches in her game, which you can say for a lot of players on these lists, is that there's something about their game you go, uh-oh, like that's off. Like a Marta Kostyuk, there isn't that clear offensive firepower that does give me pause. Like Marta Kostyuk, it does give me pause that she is, been nervy in a lot of these, late stage slam matches. But she has shown some promise. She came back, I think it was from 5-1 down against Dion Powery at the Australian Open after that big win over Ons Jabeur. She, figured out how to beat an ailing, but, still playing decently well, Aryna Sabalenka. I don't know if every player beats Sabalenka in those circumstances. I think she really put the pressure on her in the end, and that was really impressive. And that made me think that things were coming sooner rather than later. So I do think if we're looking at the 2 biggest stars and the 2 players who are most likely to win a slam the next, I do think this is the list. And I would not add anyone else. I mean, because we look at Coco Gauff this Wimbledon for all of her technical drawbacks. When Iga exited the draw, it really did feel like this was her slam to lose. And I guess sure enough it was, but I do think that her level of consistency, her general ability to beat basically every player ranked below her is going to really pay off for her in the next year and a half. I don't come into the US Open thinking any less of her because she lost at Wimbledon to Emma Navarro on indoor grass, in a pretty, still a new situation for her, being number 2 seed, the overwhelming favorite to win Wimbledon. I mean, that was a lot, even if she is a reigning slam champion. So I do think that she is someone who will figure that out more sooner rather than later. And so and obviously she's already won a slam. So I wouldn't put it past her to win a second one after not being entirely confident she would ever win a first. So now that, she's blown that floodgate open, now peaked at number 2 in the world, it's the only player she maybe can't beat. She might only have to play in the final. So that's a pretty big advantage for her in the near future.
No, I think that's very fair. And again, looking at my list, by the way, Iga gets her own tier because she's 182-25 since the start of the 2022 season, hasn't lost a first round match during that stretch of time as well, has won 3 straight French Open titles and 4 overall, 5 total majors now. Right? I got those numbers right, if my memory serves me correct.
2020 Roland Garros, 2022 Roland Garros and US Open, 2023, 2024. Yeah, so 5 majors, 4 French Opens, 1 US
exactly.
Open.
Her, Carlitos also. Carlitos now 4 major titles, excuse me. And so that's why I'm trying to keep track of it.
Well, that Alcaraz number is updating fairly quickly.
Yeah, exactly. They're both updating.
It's doubled, in fact, in the last 6 weeks.
And again, Iga gets her own tier because she's the benchmark by which everyone is measured. And had I wanted this pod to go 4 hours, I was going to ask the question for every player: what is the likelihood they beat Iga? Because honestly, that's the question that defines the next decade as well. And you almost wonder if you have to deck Goff a tier just given the struggle she's had in that matchup particularly. But then she's been so good against anyone else, so ultimately she ends up in tier 1 alongside of Mira Andreeva. Tier 2, of course, Chinwen, Noskova, Kostyuk. Tier 3, Navarro, Schneider, Raducanu, Fernandez, Anisimova, Potapova, Tauson, and Kruger. Worth mentioning just quickly, the honorable mentions, DK, since I know you're curious. Still too soon. This category is just too soon, too young. Brenda Fruvertova, Alina Kornieva, Clairvine Gunaway, Hannah Klugman, Maya Joint, Sarah Bielik, Robin Montgomery, Eva Jovic. Those are my too soon prospects, but trust me, I've seen them play and I'm intrigued.
Did in that list that you just rattled off, did you mention the Croatian teenager who almost beat Peyton Stearns?
Is it Petra Marchenko, I believe, or something like that?
No. Oh my God.
I did mention her, but she could be on the list. I like that.
Oh, there it is. Lucia Chiric Bagaric.
Okay, not yet, but I'll throw her on the list next time.
It seemed like it seemed like a Gruskin name, and I know
yeah, no, I like it. I've got a college quartet for you: Mary Stoyana, Dasha Vidmanova, Amelia Raetsky, Savannah Broadus. And then these aren't top 50 players, but these are all good players, age 23 or younger: Diane Perry, Clara Burrell, Wang Xinyu, Wang Shiyu, Elizabeth Cocchiaretto, Peyton Stearns, Katie Valinette, Alicia Parks, Haley Baptiste. Those are all good players.
No love for Lulu Soon.
I'm a Lulu fan. Let me see a little bit more out of the lefty before I put her firmly on this list at the tour level. Still, obviously, she had a fantastic tournament, no doubt. That said, DK, I had you here not just for the 23 and under tiers, but I wanted you for the upward mobility rankings as well. The players who have that opportunity to make big jumps up the rankings moving forward. And again, players you should look out down the home half of stretch of this season as well, as we go through these next 3 to 5, as well as decade-long time span. Now, again, this one we can go through a little bit quicker because there is some serious overlaps on the names. Let's start at the bottom where there's not overlap. Tier number 3. This is the list of players I just called former Slam champion tier on the upwards mobility ranking. All players we know what the peak looks like. That's Naomi Osaka, Emma Raducanu, Bianca Andreescu, and Sonia Kenin, who, yes, has fallen out of the conversation, but still just 25 years old, sitting at 55 in the world, actually ranked higher than Raducanu right now, even if obviously Raducanu's grass court month was better than anything we've seen from Kenin since late last season.
She played well in Rome.
Yeah, fine. Tier 3, Osaka, Raducanu, Andreescu, Kenin. Who would you bet on most to make a leap here over the next 6 months? And do you like this upward mobility tier?
I'm curious to see tier 2 and tier 1, but I mean, it should be Osaka. And I feel like, in terms of vibes and hype and anticipation, I feel like Osaka would be like tier 1 because like we've been so enthused by what we saw against Iga Swiatek, what we saw against in Rome, and it hasn't really panned out. Unfortunately, it hasn't been like a lot to show for it, but we're still, I think, all, bracing for this hard court revival that we're hoping to get from Naomi in the summer. And I certainly think she's capable of it, but she's got to start winning these matches. She can't just keep playing well and not winning them. And, that that in and of itself will breed confidence. The more she can start winning these, she's played a lot of close matches in 2024 and has won none of them. I'm really struggling to think of like a close match that she like, maybe like Petra Martic in the Middle East. Like it's really, it's a short list.
Yeah. No, the good thing is you've seen signs Osaka, Raducanu, and even Andreescu all playing better of late. And so hopefully we can get them all at their best because, again, those are 4 former Slam champions. I still think have really good tennis in them, whether it's youth or just signs of late. Tier number 2, again, you could call this, oh, I apologize. That's the wrong graphic hit by me. Tier number 2, here we go. You could call this the Ludmila Samsonova tier of just, I'm not going to quit on the Samsonova upwards mobility. Again, has she struggled mightily of late? Yes, she's still 13 in the rankings. There's a world where she could be a top 8 player, like if it just somehow clicked for 11 months consecutively. We talked top Kostyuk, Chinwen. Chinwen right now sitting at, what, 8 in the rankings. That feels about, again, that feels a little high given the level we've seen from her of late, but I think she could be a perennial top 5 player. Kostyuk currently sitting at 19 in the rankings. I think top 14, higher range feels better for her, given I just had her in tier 2. Schneider, I obviously already made the case for as well. And then I had any injured Czech on this list as well. Muchova, Krejcikova, Vondrousova. If they're healthy, they belong in the top 8 conversation. So that's my tier 2 upwards mobility. What do you think?
So upwards mobility is measuring who's most likely to end the year ranked higher than they currently are.
Yeah, and just again, jump up a tier in the conversation for this 2024 season.
Okay. I mean, it's so funny because like though you look at the gravitas that tier 3 brings and nothing really jumps out at tier 2. I mean, I certainly would have loved to see a better season from Ludmila Samsonova, who I adore. And I
tier
feel like
2's had better results overall than tier 3 this year. That's why tier 3 is like their upside is higher because we've seen it. Tier 2 is they have projected upside and we've seen signs of it here in 2024.
Right. I guess feels like, but even their best, I guess, other than Chinwen making the Australian Open final, does not have the same like gravitas that anything. There's still so much perception. There's such a perception lag in tier 2, unfortunately. But I do feel like there should be a shout out. This is a visual medium, so I do feel like we should be giving some honorable mention to the recent Wimbledon 4th round maker Yulia Putintseva, who is currently my lock screen because I love that picture. Yeah, I mean, who's most likely? Yeah, this is a good list.
Yeah, it's appreciated. And then my tier 1 list. Well, it's rare that you say it's a good list. My tier 1 players we already talked about. Andreeva, Noskova, obviously both young enough that you think big leaps are coming. It's just a matter of let's rack up more matches throughout the course of their career. Again, players I didn't put on this list, like I don't know if Paulini's getting any higher than back-to-back Slam finals. I know Jabeur right now 16. That feels low from a ranking perspective, but she hasn't been top 8 consistent over the course of this season. Like people are kind of settling into the tiers they almost belong in. I'm not sure how many players have ecosystem shaking results left in them here in 2024. So yeah, this is a pretty basic list. 4 Slam champions in tier 3. Again, Osaka, Raducanu, Andreescu, Kenin. Tier 2, names you've heard before: Samsonova, Kostyuk, Chinwen, Schneider, all the Czechs. Tier 1, Andreeva, Noskova. But like that's the list of players I'm locked in on down the home stretch for breakthroughs. DK, final word on this topic belongs to you.
I guess upward mobility, though, like no love for like Danielle Collins, like someone who could probably.
Is she going to be better than 6th in the points race? Like that's
maybe.
Where she should...
I mean, we're going back to hard courts. Like maybe she can win the U.S. Open. I don't know.
You think that's legit? Like you think so?
I don't know. I certainly didn't expect what we've gotten so far. And I feel like we're heading back to hard courts. Maybe she'll have the break that she really kind of needed. She'll be healthy, presumably. What she'll do with the Olympics.
I guess my thing is we already saw her play top 5 tennis this year. Like, I don't know how much better than that she's going to be. Like, she was the best player she was that good for 2 weeks consecutively. We've already seen that. So I guess
I think the crux of this, I find this ranking very confusing.
Yeah. Upwards mobility is an arbitrary, it's like an arbitrary thing. I guess.
Maybe like an Azarenka, perhaps. Like I'm surprised she didn't make because she's always done well at the U.S. Open season.
Like, how much will she play? And how again for every big run we see, then she's out second round withdrawal due to some injury, unfortunately, that she sustained. Not bad. Look, I went through the lists. I wanted to be more extensive than I did. I kind of like
Svitolina.
That's a comment we just got on YouTube. Someone says Svitolina should be tier 2 for upwards mobility. So I agree with you, DK. Shout out. I don't know. Am I missing any players? Anyone else you want to think of as
I
we
don't know.
bring up this conversation? Any final thoughts
I
before we
feel like
wrap
I'm in like
today's
a
show?
Gruskin. I'm in a Gruskin headspace. I'm just like naming names at this point. I mean, like Anna Kalinskaya. I'm surprised that she didn't make it onto your list.
Yeah, is
Um,
she gonna get any higher than where she is right now? 17th, new career high in the live rankings. Like, show it to me. She's got to play that consistent for another 6 months
show it to me,
consecutively.
Rachel.
No, Navarro has done it for 6 months consecutively. Kalinskaya has done it in
You in
two
that 6
4-week
months.
batches. Well, 6 weeks matters. Like, that's how you get into a tour finals conversation. That's how you get to 10th in a points race.
I know. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Talk to me in a year, I suppose.
Yeah. Fair enough. When we do these next time, that will be the updated rankings. That's everything, folks. Your 23 and under WTA tiers and your upward mobility rankings. A thank you to all of you who tuned into the live chat, live show, who chimed in the live chat as well. We appreciate your thoughts. A thank you to you, DK, as well. Any final things you got to plug, tennis.com wise?
Off the last couple of days.
Yeah, like
I mean, there's some stuff that's on tennis.com this week, and I just maybe want to clarify that I'm only affiliated with podcasts that I guest on. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
I like to hear it. Well, again, thank you to you for taking the time to join us. Thank you, as always, to our super producer, Daniel Westhoff. What sort of a job does he have to do, DK?
He does a fuck of an editing job.
Day in, day out, making everything possible. Shout out to him. Shout out as well to all of you who tuned in. And again, we will be back tomorrow on the podcast feed. We will be back live either later this week or next week with more live shows here on YouTube. With that said, though, signing off for now for the fantastic David Kane, our super producer, Daniel Westhoff, and all of us here at both Cracked Racquets and the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex Gruskin. DK, what do we tell our listeners?
And that's the break.
And we will see you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.
До свидания.